Hi, welcome to my Tazavesh Solia's Gambit guide. In this guide, I'll be breaking down all the abilities of all enemies you will face in a typical route in this dungeon. I'll be uploading the VODs seen in this video separately if you wish to see those. I'll also be uploading a routes video for Gambit in the future, so be sure to subscribe if you wish to see that. Just like with the previous guides, I'll be marking important or impactful mob abilities in red, and non-important or low damaging abilities in green. Gambit has to be one of the most fun dungeons in rotation at the moment because there is an army of Murlocs you get to murder in the first half of the dungeon. This allows for some unique and creative ideas when routing. In addition to this, Gambit only has 13 unique mobs, excluding bosses. This means it's easy to learn and pick up. Without further ado, let's begin. In the first area, you'll face the aforementioned army of Murlocs. In some routes, some opt to pull an extremely aggressive first pull with Lust. This first pull often comprises of at least one of each unique Murloc and a whole bunch of filler Murlocs. One important aspect of Murlocs is that they flee when they get low on health. This can be dangerous, as when they run wildly in multiple directions, they may run into other Murloc packs and pull them, extending the pull and potentially overwhelming the tank. As for the Murlocs themselves, let's begin first with the filler Murlocs. The Murloc Shore Runner is a low health Murloc which acts purely as fodder for the pull. This is your chance to top the meters by padding with heavy AoE abilities. Next, the Murloc Shell Crusher. Their first ability is Shell Cracker, dealing significant damage to your tank and knocking them back. Tanks, beware, as this can potentially push you into another enemy pack. Their important ability, however, is Cry of Murloc. After a 3-second cast time, they enrage all nearby Murlocs, increasing all damage dealt by 50%. This lasts for 30 seconds, and their size and strength will overwhelm your tank given enough time. You can't interrupt it using a traditional interrupt, but you can use a stop such as stuns, fears, or CCs. And in high keys where this will very quickly kill your tank, it may be the right play. However, outside of high keys, the next mob has a far more important ability that needs to be stopped. The Murloc Scalebinder. You will learn to fear that name. Their main ability is Invigorating Fish Stick. After a 1.5 second cast time, they will spawn an invigorating fish stick nearby. This fish stick heals all Murlocs in a large radius around it for a significant amount of health every 3 seconds, in addition to reducing their damage taken by 25%. Note that because it has a radius, you can pull Murlocs out of its range if these sticks spawn too far. These fish sticks are not affected by AoE abilities. You must target it with single target abilities. This makes the fish sticks relatively tanky, and if even one spawns, all DPS must immediately swap to it. Just like with the Enrage, it cannot be interrupted, but it can be stopped. And stopping it is an absolute priority. If you can help it, have one of your DPS with a stop actively focus it to stop the cast. Note that the fish stick only heals Murlocs, so if a Goliath, covered later, is nearby, it won't heal from these sticks. Scalebinders are by far the #1 priority target. Next is the Murloc Fishmancer. The Fishmancer casts Waterbolt. It's an interruptible ability that deals damage to their current target, the tank. Interrupt it if your tank is low or has difficulties dealing with magic damage. Though you may wish to save your interrupt for their other ability, Volatile Pufferfish. After a 1.5 second interruptible channel, the Fishmancer throws a pufferfish at a player. This spawns a bright big blue AoE, which explodes after a few seconds. This will kill you in one shot, so you must step out of it. Know that it can be difficult to see in the water, so you may want to stand on dry land to spot it more easily. The last Murloc is the Murkbrine Wave Jumper. They only have one ability, Murg-Erg-Lur-Lur Leap, where they leap to a player, dealing some damage. This damage is increased by Shell Crusher's Enrage, so you'll want to watch out for this, for it is a significant amount of damage. Around this first area, packs have a combination of these Murlocs. Generally, it follows a formula of 3 large Murlocs and 4 Shore Runners. In Pugs, Scalebinders are by far the most dangerous mobs. If you happen to pull multiple Scalebinders at once, you may find yourself spending more time killing fish sticks than actual Murlocs, so you should plan your routes carefully and be mindful of fleeing Murlocs. Beside these Murlocs are a few roaming Coastwalker Goliaths. Their first ability is Boulder Throw, where after a 1.5 second cast, the Goliath throws a boulder at a player, often arranged. It stuns targets hit for 2 seconds, but more often than not, it just instantly kills whoever gets hit by it, so avoid it. Goliaths also have a sort of soft enrage with their ability Undertow. The Goliath stomps the ground, dealing damage to all players. Players hit are applied with 1 stack of a debuff, which increases their damage taken from Undertow by 15%. This caps out at 2 stacks. At higher and fortified keys, at 2 stacks, this will instantly kill you without defensives. So you effectively have to kill Goliaths before they cast their Undertow 3 or 4 times. Note that this is a debuff applied to you. It does not go away once you kill the Goliath. This means pulling Goliaths back to back can extend your stacks and potentially lead to a wipe. And that's all for the first part. You want to plan your routes ahead of time to avoid pulling more mobs than you need to. Once you've had your fill of Murloc Genocide, you may make your way into the structure at the end of the room. The hallway has a few mobs guarding the way. Normally you skip these as these take a while to kill and deal a lot of damage. But should your tank choose not to skip them, I'll cover their abilities briefly. Their first ability is Crackle, where they let forward a path of lightning. It does damage to you while you stand in it, so just step aside. Charged Pulse is a 3.5 second cast, which upon finishing, deals significant, potentially lethal damage to all players in a large radius and knocks them back. Step out of this, and past that, you'll fight your first boss, Hyldbrande. The boss starts first by casting Purged by Fire. The boss targets a player and after a few seconds, a beam spawns which follows that player. The beam deals significant damage to that player and leaves behind a purging field, causing any player that walks into it to take damage. You'll want to run away from the laser and try to guide the laser to a nearby wall. The boss then casts Titanic Crash, a 2-second cast where he slams the ground, dealing damage and stunning all targets in a heavily telegraphed cleave. This always targets the tank, so other players should stand behind the boss. He also casts Searing Swing, where he heavily strikes the tank twice. Tanks will want to mitigate this, or potentially get instantly killed. The boss also casts Purifying Burst, splitting a ball of energy into 3 projectiles, dealing heavy damage to 3 players. Healers, beware of this, and keep everyone topped up in anticipation. The boss also spawns Vault Purifiers throughout the fight in pairs. These Vault Purifiers frequently cast Empowered Defense, a long channel which grants Hyldbrande a 25% damage reduction each. You can stun them to cancel this channel. If this channel is on cooldown, however, they instead cast Valorous Bolt, an interruptible ability. It targets a random player and trucks them. You'll want to interrupt this. You'll also want to kill them before the next boss's ability. When the boss's energy reaches 100, he starts to cast Sanitizing Cycle. He approaches the middle of the room and begins to cast it. While he's casting it, he'll be protected by a security shield, rendering him immune to damage. During this phase, the terminal at the front of the room can be interacted with. The player that interacts with it will gain a buff where they can see 4 symbols on it. The order of these symbols correspond to the positions they must be placed on in the real world. 4 runes will spawn around the boss, and the player that interacts with the panel in the front must tell all other players which runes go to which panels. Failing to do this fast enough will cover the room entirely in a sanitizing field, which will eventually kill the whole party. Note that when a player places a rune in the incorrect panel, they will be stunned for 3 seconds by runic feedback. During Sanitizing Cycle, the Vault Purifiers begin to cast Keeper's Protection, each blocking one of the 4 security panels from interaction. To finish this part of the fight, the adds must be killed to place the rune in the panel. Note that adds gain immunity to CC effects in this part of the fight. This is why it's important to kill the adds before this phase starts. After completing Sanitizing Cycle, the boss fight resumes and you rinse and repeat until the boss is defeated. You'll generally want to kill the boss after he's cast at most 2 cycles. You then take a portal to follow Celia and find yourself in Boralus. There are only 3 new enemies you face. The first is the burly deckhand. The deckhand has 2 abilities. The first is a tank hit, which deals a fair amount of damage, called the Haymaker. The second is Super Saison, which enrages the deckhand, increasing their damage for 14 seconds. An enraged deckhand's Haymaker trucks your tank. Your tank may need to kite them when they enrage. You could use a stop for this cast, so an AoE stun as they're casting Super Saison can be handy. Note that packs with multiple deckhands should always be approached with caution. The other mob in this pull is the Hourglass Tide Sage. They spam cast Brackish Bolt, dealing some damage to their current target, the tank. You can interrupt this. Their other ability is Tidal Burst, which operates similarly to the pufferfish seen earlier. An AoE spawns that deals damage after a short delay. However, unlike the pufferfish, you can interrupt these tidal bursts to cancel the damage. Both these abilities are good candidates for your interrupts. Farther down the hill, you face one other enemy, the Corsair Officer. The Corsair Officer mostly just melees the tank, but occasionally casts Sword Toss. This deals damage to a player and ricochets to an additional target within 6 yards. In my experience, this isn't something that I actively watch out for, but ranged players can spread out lightly to reduce incoming damage from this. After defeating most of the trash here, you face Timecap'n Hooktail, the captain who is a dragon. Timecap'n Hooktail is a chaotic boss fight that is exacerbated by a bad tank. First, Timecap'n Hooktail has a hook for a tail. If you stand behind the boss swipes her tail, dealing damage to players behind her and hooking them with Hooked. This causes them to take a lot of damage, so don't stand behind her. Throughout the fight, she'll summon crewmates to attack the party. They walk slowly and only melee their target. Note that they cannot be taunted, and they randomly walk towards party members. These brutes deal a fair amount of damage, and that damage is amplified when the boss casts double time after some time. This increases their attack and movement speed. This makes it significantly harder to kite these mobs, so you'll want to deal with them early. However, you don't actually want to damage them with your abilities. Rather, your tank will utilize the Timecap'n's ability, Infinite Breath. The boss channels for a few seconds to lock onto your tank. After locking on, after another 2 seconds of cast, the boss will breathe Arcane in a large cone, instantly killing any brutes caught in this breath. This breath, however, also does good damage to players and knocks players back. Tanks will want to avoid getting knocked back by this. Throughout the fight, the boss will also use her ship to fire cannonballs at the players, dealing significant damage and leaving behind flame patches that do good damage. You'll want to avoid the cannonballs. Be careful as the cannonballs' hit circles are a little bit smaller than they appear to be. Occasionally, the ship also fires a chain at a player, dealing instant damage and begins to reel in that player towards the ship. Should you enter the water, you will be instantly killed by sharks in the water, so you want to fight against that pull. The trick to this fight is that the tank will want to pull the boss as close as they can to the wall to increase the width of the breath, allowing them to kill as many brutes as possible. The tank, however, needs to be mindful of DPS and their position in this fight. Particularly melee DPS need a position near the boss to attack. This may take getting used to know just how much space they have and need. If there are too many flame patches nearby, the tank may opt to pull the boss slightly farther from the wall to give melee some more space. Upon defeating the dragon, you take another portal back to Tazavesh and find yourself in the final boss arena. There are 3 unique mobs in this area. The first is the Adorned Starseer. Most groups opt to skip this first abandoned Starseer as they take a while to kill. You can hug either left or right wall to avoid him. There are 2 more Starseers later on, so I'll run through their abilities. There are 2 abilities. The first is Drifting Star, a 3.5 second cast, which sends out a drifting star which deals significant damage and knocks players back in its path. It moves forward in the direction the Starseer is facing. Step aside. The Starseer's other ability is Wandering Pulsar, summoning a Wandering Pulsar. The Pulsar continuously casts an uninterruptible pulse, a 1.5 second cast which deals good damage to the whole party. When this spawns, all players must swap to it and kill it. Among the other packs is the Devoted Accomplice. The Devoted Accomplice casts Energy Slash frequently, dealing damage to the tank and applying a stack of a debuff, which increases the tank's damage taken from every Energy Slash by 25%. This needs to be dispelled by the healer. When low, these accomplices also cast Reinvigorate, which after a 3.5 second cast, restores 60% of their health and increases their haste by 50% for 10 seconds. This is important to interrupt or stop. Accomplices also cast Teleport if their current target is too far, making kiting these mobs during necrotic weeks particularly difficult. Finally is the Killer Mob focused Ritualist. They spam cast Hyperlight Bolt, which deals damage to the tank. They also occasionally cast Unstable Rift, 1 at a time. After casting for 4 seconds, they unleash a Rift Explosion, dealing significant damage to the entire group. This is a high priority interrupt. You must interrupt this, or you will likely succumb to a group wipe. When planning routes, you'll want to kill all the mobs near the boss, as the boss requires movement in a large area to fight. Upon defeating the last Starseer, you can continue and finally pull the boss, Solea herself. Solea herself is a long boss fight. The fight can be split into two distinct fights, when Solea is small and when Solea is big. When small, we begin the fight by pulling her to a nearby cart. This is useful for the first ability she casts, Summon Assassins. She summons 2 Cartel Assassins, which are melee attacking mobs. After a few seconds, they teleport away and begin to cast Shuriken Blitz, where after a 3-second cast, they let loose a barrage of shurikens, applying a bleed which deals significant damage to the whole party. You'll want to interrupt this. These assassins spawn close to the boss if you do it near this position, so that's why you put her here. After you summon the assassins, Solea will cast Hyperlight Spark, dealing damage to all players. Avoid stacking with your teammates and keep damaging the boss and her assassins. Collapsing Star is her important ability. She does it in both phases. She spawns a large star nearby. This star contains 4 charges of collapsing energy. At the end of the duration of the star, it explodes, applying all 4 charges of collapsing energy to the players. At 4 stacks of collapsing energy, your team will wipe. It is a lot of damage, so you'll want to remove these stacks one by one, and heal through them individually. To remove 1 stack, you'll walk into the star. This will knock you back, and apply 1 stack of collapsing energy to all players. After that, you'll want to heal up, and then remove another stack, and another, until the star is empty. You can opt to leave the last charge to blow up on its own. You want to space out these removals, as doing it too early could refresh the debuff. That's all the abilities of the boss she does until she reaches 40% health, at which point she teleports to the center of the room and summons 5 relics of the first ones. These relics take formation and position themselves in the shape of a star. The boss then seems to grow a few times her original size and restores her health back to 100. She will then empower and link herself to the relics using Power Overwhelming, causing her to be immune to damage. To remove this immunity, you'll want to use her next ability, Hyperlight Jolt, on all the relics to depower the relics. Hyperlight Jolt draws a line between all players. Pay attention to where your arrow comes from and where it's going, as after the boss finishes her 6-second cast of Hyperlight Jolt, it fires, going through all players in the directed arrow's directions. The lines deal damage to all players caught in them, and depowers all relics caught in them. You'll want to ensure that all relics are depowered to bring the boss out of her invulnerability phase. When hit by this jolt, a debuff will be applied to you, which makes you take 25 additional damage from future Hyperlight Jolts. This stacks, so you are on a timer to deactivate all the relics before the damage overwhelms your party. She infinitely casts Hyperlight Jolt as long as she is in this invulnerability phase. Once you deactivate all the relics, the boss will fight you head on. You'll want to pull the boss into this corner to mitigate her next ability, Energy Fragmentation. She lets loose a projectile which bounces between all the relics one by one. Every time it lands on a relic, it releases energy fragmentations in several directions. Keep an eye on these fragments, as if you are hit by them, you'll be knocked back and a dot will be applied on you. It does a great amount of damage. Her final ability is Hyperlight Nova. A 3-second cast, at the end of the cast it does lethal damage in an AoE around the relics and the boss herself. You'll just want to step out of it. While in phase 2, she still spawns collapsing stars, so you'll still have to walk into it to pop it and slowly heal through the charges one by one, all while dodging energy fragmentations and Hyperlight Novas. After about 40 seconds, she'll cast Power Overwhelming again, and you'll need to depower all the relics once more to be able to damage the boss to 0 health. And that's the whole fight. And dungeon. I hope you look forward to doing the dungeon itself. I know it can be intimidating playing Mythic Plus, especially if you aren't caught up with all the dungeon mechanics. I hope this video taught you something new about Gambit. I plan on making a guide for all other Season 4 dungeons too, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch those. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next dungeon guide.